Hello everyone. Welcome to the EdHeroes Global Forum 2025. And today we are going to have our advisory board sessions. This session is titled, Are We Going Too Fast? No Person Left Behind. So now that's an interesting title, isn't it? But before we continue to the conversations, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Farhanisa Nasution. I'm the Expansion Director of EdHeroes, and it's an honor for me to be the moderator for this session. And back again with the topic, right? So the title, Are We Going Too Fast? No Person Left Behind, is actually something that we have been thinking a lot these days, especially when it comes to bridging the digital gap in education. This opening session gathers EdHeroes Advisory Board members to reflect on the dual realities of rapid technological advancement and persistent educational inequality that happens around the globe. And as innovation accelerates across the globe as well, millions in emerging economies are still struggling with basic access. Now, how can we ensure that the future of education is inclusive, equitable, and truly leaves no one behind? Now, without any further ado, allow me to introduce our panelists for today. The first one is Harry Patrinos, Head Department of Education Reform and Endowed Chair, University of Arkansas. He's also the former Senior Advisor of World Bank Education. Hello, Harry. How are you?
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Great. And now we have Cecilia Faka-Jones. She is the Senior Advisor, Abu Dhabi's Early Childhood Authority. She is also the former Executive Director of Bernard van Leer Foundation. Hello, Cecilia. How are you?
Hello. Happy to be here again. Welcome.
Yes, happy to have you here and looking forward to discuss. And we also have with us Dr. Osama Obeidat. He is the CEO of Queen Rania Teacher Academy. Hello, Dr. Osama. How are you?
Hello, Farhanisa. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Great to be with you as well, and cannot wait to start the discussions. And we also have our speaker, Francisco J. Marmolejo, but he will join us a little bit later today. Now we are going to proceed with the questions that are going to discuss about how to balance innovations and inclusion. As we know, all of our advisory board here, you have incredible amount of experience. And in your experience working across diverse educational contexts, how can institutions balance the pressure to innovate with the imperative to ensure access and equity, especially for communities with limited digital infrastructure? Perhaps we can start from Harry.
Thank you, Farhanisa. Education needs innovation. The real challenge is designing systems that promote excellence and provide opportunities from the beginning. One of the most striking examples in my experience is the Apex High School in Cape Town, South Africa. This is located in a low-income community with limited resources. Yet they managed to integrate digital tools into their teaching and learning in a way that's effective and equitable. They did this through their leadership, of course, but also tremendous public support and private contributions for the infrastructure, for the equipment, the curriculum that's needed to create this learning opportunity. And they are able to reach all learners in this challenging environment and do it quite successfully. But too often, we see that innovation is too concentrated in already advantaged context. This creates or has the potential to create a two-tiered system that with one group moving ahead while the rest are left behind. So, of course, I think we all agree we need to avoid this. We must find ways to pair innovation with policies such as targeted subsidies, digital public goods, and universal access strategies. So public policy plays a big role, but also we need to find other partners. And I think public-private partnerships can help, especially when they're targeted and where they're held accountable for outcomes. And of course, we need the flexibility to define and deliver that innovation. And I think at the Apex High School, innovation isn't flashy, but it's practical. A few well-placed interventions in connectivity, teacher training can make all the difference. And inclusion has to be a big part of that. It's a prerequisite for scale, of course, and we need systems that include everyone as we move forward.
That's interesting because I agree with you. When it comes to education, we are talking about an ecosystem. So it is actually a collective responsibility. Public policy holds one of the major key, but also the private sectors can play our role, in order to create the best environment for education. And moving on to Cecilia, because you also have experience working as a senior advisor for Abu Dhabi's Early Childhood Authority. How do you see this balance about public policy and also the actual or factual implementation on the field?
Thank you. I think, and honestly also because of my experience of being a Minister of Social Development in Ecuador, I think that when you're talking from a policy perspective, it's very important that you're talking about social equity and really trying to find policies, programs, and mechanisms that allow you to close the gaps. And I think that's where technology and all the new technologies that we're using in education can actually play a very strategic role. Because I definitely would agree with Hari that this new technologies and access to good platforms can actually support and help close the gaps to access. But I think that the very important thing then is, are the new technologies that we're using to education, are they really working on the quality of content? And they're also being inclusive from the perspective of including all the diversity of groups that you need to consider. Because I think for me, the biggest concern nowadays is not about denying the innumerable benefits that we can get from using new technologies into education, because I think that's a must and it's happening and it's everywhere. But it's actually thinking about, are we having good quality of new technologies that can really enforce on the kind of skills and thinking that we need to promote in our young generation? And are we using these platforms to be really inclusive to, for example, the diversity of languages that we want to emphasize while learning and creating new content. So for me, it's almost about also finding ways that policy can also regulate the quality of content in a way and really kind of like flag these are the good platforms that children and families can access in order to accelerate learning and also support creativity, rather than having platforms that do everything for the kids. So I think it's really interesting in the work that I've been doing in this last decade on early childhood development exclusively. I think it's also super interesting to see that even in the early years where you're not into the formal educational system, but you're actually also kind of like creating the foundations of learning. I think it's very important also to think about how can we use new technologies in order to be supportive of healthy habits, right? So for me, it's also about finding this balance of how can innovation support healthy well-being of children, because otherwise, rather than having benefits, it can start being very harmful for children, right? And we start seeing a lot of addiction in very early years to screen time and just this, the fact that children do not have any other options but that. So I also think it, from a parenting perspective and from an early years perspective, there's also the co-responsibility of whoever's part of this caregiving on really understanding and creating this balance between the use of technologies to promote good content and promote good and positive learning, and the balance with other kind of activities that really allow children to have these healthy connections with other people, with nature, with the context, with the environment. So I think it's fascinating, actually, the ecosystem that we're building nowadays, but it's actually going really fast. So we need to be also fast in understanding what is the impact of everything that we're doing.
Well, Yes, Cecilia, thank you very much. Because I think it is very interesting for the stakeholders or someone that's in charge of the policy to find and adapt through the times and time, because technology is always evolving. And as for the early childhood development, it is crucial also to find the balance, on how to do ethical things in technological environment, especially when it comes to education. Because right now we have the society, that's face to face. We get to meet people in real life, but also we also have the digital society where they have our own norms, the ethics, the things that they have done. And we need to be able to think about that and integrate that, because it's a part of our life, not only the offline part, but we also have our online life, right? So I think that's important and that's very interesting to discuss. But before we continue to Dr. Osama, I see Francisco has joined us. Hello, Francisco. How are you? Can you hear us?
Doing fine. Great to participate in the session. It's a very exciting topic and very timely.
Sure. Great to have you. So let me introduce Francisco to all of our audiences. So Francisco J. Marmolejo is the Higher Education President and Education Advisor at Qatar Foundation, and he'll be joining our session today. And yeah, so Francisco, you're actually just in time for the conversation because we just start. And the first question is about, in your experience working across diverse educational contexts, how can institutions balance the pressure to innovate with the imperative to ensure access and equity, especially for communities with limited digital infrastructure? Now, we have Cecilia, and previously we have Harry has answered. And I'm going to Dr. Osama, and then I'm going straight to you after Dr. Osama. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
Great. Amazing. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Osama, previously Cecilia mentioned early childhood is the foundation of a person's lifetime, because every human has to go through early childhood, and early childhood development is one of the most crucial parts when it comes to to develop a human being. And one of the foundation of education is also the teacher. So what about your experience in Queen Rania Teacher Academy? How to balance the pressure to innovate with the imperative to ensure access and equity, especially you're working with teachers and communities with a lot of for example, teachers has a lot of pressure, should I say, because the students now the students are really, really smart, and teacher has to be smarter than the students. So how are you working with that?
Well, thank you, Farhanisa. This is a great question. And before I answer, I would like to comment on the title of the session, which is "Are we going too fast?" I think if we're talking about technological change, definitely we're going too fast. However, the response of the education system is too slow to these changes, which may create, in fact, more unequitable communities and society rather than solving it. So, leaving people behind or leaving students behind is definitely might be due not to the rapid pace of the technological change, but to the slow response of the education system to the change around us, including technology. Going back to your questions, and my good friend Harry talked about two things, which is the public-private partnerships and the teacher training, which is, again, they are more relevant to the work that we do at Queen Rania Teacher Academy, and where we have been supporting teachers, in fact, to cope up with all these changes, and by coordinating with the Ministry of Education. For example, in the past few years, we have created a couple of courses for digital literacy for teachers. Where more than 100,000 teachers now, not only from Jordan, but from the region, have benefited from that. So based on international competencies for teachers. So it is important, not only at the early childhood phase, but also in all stages. But in our context as well, we have technology and digital literacy have created, in fact, has supported our work to get access to communities that without technology, we would not be able to connect with. For example, before our digital transformation, we used to train or to reach to no more than 1,000 beneficiaries in our different programs. However, again, due to COVID and our strategic direction, we now, due to technology, we have access to more than 10,000 beneficiaries every year, not only in Jordan and cities and urban areas and rural areas, but also in communities outside Jordan. So, in fact, technology has also supported creating the equitable and more inclusive practices and opportunities for students. Definitely, teachers need to be well prepared, and to be prepared, there has to be infrastructure. And again, for the infrastructure to be in place, there has to be some regulations and policies in place. Because what countries do, what do you want to achieve, how to achieve it, who are the stakeholders? All these are the prerequisites for any requirements for any engagement and development of teacher training. Again, as part of it is the digital literacy, and I know we will talk about bridging the gap in digital literacy, but the first thing is to start with empowering teachers, preparing teachers, and building the partnerships and relationships with the communities. And from the work Harry did globally before he joining the university, I know he used to work a lot on public-private partnership, and we did some work together back in a few years. And definitely, this is the model that the government should adopt. The public sector can't do it alone, and the private sector can't do it alone. They have to complement each other. Community, parents, different stakeholders, policymakers has to come around the table and discuss how we can bridge the gap. But again, we shouldn't be shy that things are moving fast. I think we also need to look at the response of the education system, and because moving fast is fine. However, the education system should respond even faster to the change. And this have created a gap and lag between the needs of the educators or the learners and the change around us.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Osama, because it's really interesting when it comes to the system and the education. So education system, the technology is always rapidly changing, like in the light speed. You know, when we talk about technology, like 10 years, we don't know anything about meeting like this. You know, everyone is in different places, different time zones, but we can do conversations just at the same time through the technology, the virtual technology, which is something that is unimaginable back then, like 10 years ago. So it is important for educational sectors, stakeholders, and also the public policy stakeholders to work together and find the solutions, you know, in order to create the closer gap. You know, I'm not saying to end the gap, because we're currently on the process to that. So to close these gaps. And Francisco, what about you? What are your take on this matters?
Well, again, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this session, and to, after my colleagues speaking about this, most likely what I will say might look like repetitive, but of course it is the risk of speaking with the wisdom of ignorance of what I couldn't hear from my colleagues. But being said that, I think the first thing to recognize, first of all, is that it is an imperative, for sure, no question about it. And as it was mentioned by Osama, of course, the problem is that we are too slow in responding with solutions for the past, for problems of the future. So I think it is important to put that, you know, up front by saying, you know, we have a problem and we have to address that problem. The second thing that probably we need to say is that there is no magic solutions. You know, anyone who, of us who may come with this magic solution, relatively simplistic if you want, we know that it's going to be wrong, because the realities of the world in which we live today, and of course what it happens in the classroom and in the educational process outside of the classroom is much more complex than just coming up with relatively simplistic solutions. And of course, one of the reasons is because we tend to think that with this challenge, the solution is computers or electronic devices or hardware or anything like that. It is more than that. Among other reasons, because education no longer happens only in that black box, which is the classroom. And of course, unless we recognize that, we are going to be coming with solutions that are kind of short-sighted, but not precisely responding to those specific needs. And last but not least, I think it is the issue that technology at the end of the day and these new innovations in technology are not the goal. Should be seen as the tools, and it's important to make those needed clarifications. Now, I'm a firm believer in the importance of incentives, and based on that, I truly believe that one of the ways in which we can more effectively address those dilemmas, first of all, is to take a look into the systemic approach rather than being seen that in a very sort of narrow way. Secondly, of course, putting in place the right incentives in order for people to respond to that. And that implies, of course, incentives in terms of, first of all, the understanding of the need and the value. Secondly, the teachers. Third, the students, and being seen the students as the driving force of this, not as a victims, if you want, or not as a subjects, if you want, on this thinking, but as the main actors, if you want, on this process. And then, of course, the last one that has to do with accountability. And in the absence of accountability, many decisions are being made, and most of the time, those decisions are the wrong decisions. And my last comment on the matter is about the need to see, as it has been mentioned by my colleagues before, we need to see the larger context, because one domain has to do with the policies at the national level, at the regional level, local level, but also, of course, we need to see the smaller context, which is what happens organically, in the family, in the school, in the university. And that requires, for instance, for us as educators to see this in a much more articulated way. Most of my work today and in my life has been in higher education. But unless I see the higher education as a continuing from the previous levels of education, I will continue to be one of those who are going to be blaming, the early childhood education and secondary education as the sort of the ones who caused the problem of having today in my higher education system, if you want, students who have that type of gap that you were referring to. Anyways, it's just as a starting point.
Amazing points to be made, Francisco, because we all agree that this is something that needs to be addressed. Of course, 50% of solving a problem is to admit that there is a problem and we're going too slow. And we're not ashamed of it. But what the most important thing is that we're taking steps towards closing the gaps and to find better ways on how to use education in the daily basis of educational purpose in every institutions around the world. And this brings me to the next questions about digital literacy versus digital access. Previously, everyone has mentioned something about digital gap needs to be and it's related to the infrastructure. That's why this is often seen as a hardware problem, because we know that some underserved regions, areas that force their young people especially to leave their communities, not by choice, but by necessity, just to have access to opportunity for education, for example. And this happens worldwide. But we also see, on the other hand, that there are actually a rising critical issue when it comes to digital literacy among both teachers and students. especially in the underserved regions. And how do we address the equally critical issue of these aspects? Perhaps we can start from Harry.
Thank you. You're right. Access is just the start. And we do usually talk about devices, getting devices into schools, getting students online. And you are absolutely right that access without the digital literacy, for lack of a better term, I would say it's like building roads without teaching people how to drive. So we can be very good at the infrastructure, but if we don't know how to use it, it won't be very, very useful. Or if some people aren't able to get on it, it won't help if it's not solving real problems. So the real impact, of course, will come when users, especially teachers, are integrating those tools into the instruction. And I want to give two examples going back to a dark time, the school closures due to COVID-19, and most of the research that I undertook documented learning losses, but there are some bright spots. And what were those? I would say one of them is online tutoring, and in Ukraine, because of school closures, because of the war, students were displaced and out of school. We ran a tutoring program and connected those students to tutors on a daily basis, and we found that it works. The focus was on capacity building. The tutors were trained, supported. The program was well managed and robustly evaluated. So learning can happen even in these difficult situations, even in conflict zones. But even in more stable contexts, digital tools can work if they're used appropriately. The other example I would give is distance learning. During the pandemic, when schools were closed in Uzbekistan, the government partnered with the national TV networks, recorded the country's best teachers giving the lessons, and broadcast those lessons across the country. So for the first time in the country, rural areas, underserved areas were receiving lessons from the country's best teachers. The result, there was no learning loss in Uzbekistan. And I would say the use of the technology, television in that case, was very effective. So there's an innovation which I think we can learn from. So if we want meaningful digital inclusion, we must see literacy as infrastructure. It's not an option, it's essential as broadband, and it needs to be built into the national education strategies, budgets, and the teacher training policies. And I agree with Francisco that the digital tools are precisely that. They're tools for achieving those goals that we've set for the country's education systems.
Thank you so much, Harry. Indeed, there's something that I really like from your statement, that if we think about only the digital access, it's like building roads without teaching the people how to drive, because education is a tool for a person to, make great impact, to make a better environment, and to be better for themselves. And moving on to Cecilia, what do you think about this, about digital literacy and digital access? How should we address this equally critical issue of digital literacy from your perspective?
Now, I love the metaphor of the roads. So if I have to build upon that, I think when you think about the digital axis and, the built infrastructure that you need in order to close the gaps, I think it's still huge, right? I'm from Ecuador in Latin America, and, many of our rural areas still don't even have access to internet. And there's very little access to technological devices where you could really kind of expand the facilities of having this type of platforms. And even though I think the opportunity that we have now of accessing knowledge is in a way unlimited, I think that what we need to think again is about like what are the kind of skills that children need in order to understand what is the kind of knowledge that they can access, and how can they filter and develop all these other critical skills that they need in order to filter so much information that we can access nowadays. But if we go back to this metaphor of the roads, right? Like I'm also trying to picture, this world where you actually have like highways and fast roads, and you have like slow traffic roads, and maybe you have people that can actually take like a private car or a rapid train, or people that actually still have to walk or bike or even maybe use other modes of transport. I think it's the same when it comes to accessing technology. So the digital gap, just to mention that I do think that we need to be aware that the digital gap across the world is huge. And I've heard many times say like, artificial intelligence and all the different new technologies that we're using nowadays is democratizing knowledge. I'm not sure I can stand for that statement, because it depends on how you see it. I'm not sure it's actually democratizing knowledge, or it's actually also like deepening this inequalities across the world. So I think we have to be very aware of what's happening, and just be aware of the inequalities that are still standing across many different contexts and across many different parts of the world. But what I think when it comes to from a policy perspective, what I think it's very interesting and very feasible to do is to actually understand where can you identify these gaps, and what can you do in order to invest to close the gaps, right? So I think it's in our hands on like running policy and programs to really take action in order to try to close the gaps. So that to what has to do with the built infrastructure and the access to digital tools. When it comes to digital literacy, I think that again, if we go to the literacy of what the content that we have online, I do think that we have to be very aware that there's still many different gaps. And as I was referring before, especially when it comes to very like sensitive things such as culture, I think we still have like very limited information when it comes to really customizing education to the needs of the diversity, cultural backgrounds that we might have in every society. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because I do think that there's an opportunity to use new technologies to actually create more content that really kind of like highlights the value of bringing cultural aspects back to the educational spectrum and field. But I think that and again, on my field of work on early childhood development, there's so much that children learn that goes beyond the technological context, and just being aware that children do need to have these positive experiences that happen outside of the digital world and in balance with what's happening with the digital world, it's very important. So really kind of emphasizing on the importance of considering the everyday connections that children and human beings need. And when I'm talking about connections and healthy connections, I'm really talking about these connections that happen in the immediate environment and context of children in order to create that cultural fabric that we need as societies in order to generate this like strong identity and strong ties to values, beliefs, and what we need in order to kind of like promote these thriving societies. So yes, that's those are my thoughts on both the digital gaps and access and knowledge.
Yes, Cecilia, thank you so much. Because if we are using the road as an analogy, the digital literacy and digital access is a toll road. So it's a long game for every human being, especially when it comes to early childhood development. It's a long game. So we need to be very careful. We need to pay attention to the signs, and we need to mindful to each other, because when it comes to the high roads, we need to be alert on every change, like the slightest change, even the slightest change. So moving on to Dr. Osama. So if Cecilia previously has discussed about her perspective about the digital literacy and digital access through the perspective of someone who works in the field of early childhood development. What about the teachers' view on this? Because the teachers is someone who's really, the children are actually look up to, and everybody has a teacher. Everybody has been taught by a teacher, including us, all of us here. So what are your take on this matters, Dr. Osama?
Thank you, Patrinos. Again, I think you in your introduction, you mentioned that most of the students are ahead of their teachers when it comes to digital literacy and digital skills, which is true. And that's why now we want to bridge the gap not only between teachers or within the education systems, but also between students and teachers. And that this is an important angle that we need to consider. However, sometimes if there is not enough buy-in from the policymakers, the education policymakers, on what it means to bridge that gap, then things might change. And I think there is a debate globally in many of the countries whether technology students should have access to technology or not. And for example, recently I was reading that Canada will ban students from using mobile phones and the schools as of next year. And Harry, as Canadian, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. But now most of the technology is here. We can't definitely learn, and students can't learn without having access to that. And again, some researchers, some psychologists, some early childhood development may say the opposite. The debate will continue. However, if we want to bridge the gap, definitely, as I mentioned earlier, first of all, we need to build the capacities of teachers. But we need to identify the competencies and the competency framework, first of all. Then we need to institutionalize this. We need to integrate the digital skills within the curriculum. It has to be institutionalized. It's not something, it's not a luxury. That's something must be integrated. There has to be a buy-in. But all the decision has to be based on data. Unfortunately, most of the decisions that are taken by policymakers in different parts of the world are not based on enough data. They're looking at students, looking at their needs, looking at their demographics, looking at their geographical location, etc. So all these factors have to be considered in order to start and to reach a consensus on the need to bridge that digital skills. There is an agreement on the need for financial literacy, for example. And now we move not only to talk. We are not talking about digital skills, but we're talking now about AI skills, AI literacy skills. And we recently, UNESCO has produced a framework, competency framework for teachers and for students for AI literacy. So we need to move forward. But again, it goes back to the pace. And we are still talking about whether teachers have to have the digital skills, whether students have to have access to mobile, while the world is moving fast. And I think we are left behind because of all this debate that has been created by some regulations and policies.
That is actually very interesting, Dr. Osama, because teachers are the foundation of education from all institutions, right? And when it comes to technology, especially you mentioned about AI, I've read that, for example, in Indonesia, the most used keywords for AI was about to find a healthy lifestyle. Something that people use. AI is something that people use to share and ask for views on certain matters. In short, they ask technology for opinions. And it's clearly show that we need to pay attention on how we are going to literate this digital zone, because people are actually out there. I don't know in other countries, but what I can speak is from Indonesia, my country, is that people actually ask for advices on their humanly matters to digital tools, which is the internet, which is the AI. So this is something that we need to pay attention to, because what we know is that technology is rapidly changing. They learn so fast from what we share, from what we input to them. So if we cannot keep up, and it's actually on our the losses are on our side. So yeah, I think this is very interesting to be discussed. And Francisco, what about you? What is your take on this matter?
Well, I will follow as my colleagues with a great analogy suggested by Harry. Sort of, we will continue talking about roads, and the way I see this is that roads are sort of in a way that, and we need to understand the difference, and that's very important. That's why it is important to understand the difference between digital access and digital literacy. What do we mean by that? Yeah, and Harry mentioned that the digital access is the road, and it's a foundation. It is a necessary condition in order to think about digital literacy. We cannot talk about digital literacy without digital access. It is a condition in order to. There is, of course, a big challenge that the road as such, you have mentioned the fact that the road may be a toll road. Well, one of the problems is that the road still is not a road for everybody. And that's where we start having some of the problems. Let's put that in terms of numbers. There are about 8 billion people in the world. It's a significant improvement, the fact that now there are 5.4 billion people having an iPhone or a phone, but there are 5 billion people having internet access, which is great. But that means that there are 3 billion people who don't. And the road maybe also be very even in some places. Might be a highway, as you were mentioning before, but in other cases the road might be with no pavement, and that, of course, that is a big challenge as well. There are parts of the world in which internet access, for instance, as a percentage of the total population, is relatively low. The Middle Africa, for instance, about only 27% of people have access to the internet. Central America, 74% of people. And of course, the United States, Canada, 99%. That's a big difference. So that's different type of highway. So I think it is important to put that in context. And then, of course, there is the issue of literacy, which, in my opinion, it is, again, provided that the foundation is there, even though the road might be even and might be not complete. It is, of course, the issue about the transformation. And that's where I see the value of the understanding of the digital literacy, and, of course, the need to develop efforts on the matter. And to me, the most important tool we have in our educational system is the curriculum. And in the curriculum, that's where we can be very conscious in efforts created in order to enable a definition of the levels of literacy that we want to have our students in our education systems. And that goes back to my call before about the need of articulation. Because, if we see that from a holistic standpoint, we can see the incremental approach in the literacy from the early ages of students up to the time in which they are going to get out of the universities. And unless we do that in that systemic and holistic way, in that articulated way, again, we in higher education will continue blaming the previous levels of education in how terrible they do in the issues related to digital literacy. And also we need to not to be confused, because digital literacy is not about learning to code. This is important, but probably we might be teaching students to code, we can be teaching students today on Python, and 5 or 10 years from now, Python is going to be a joke, which for sure is going to be the case. So I think we shouldn't miss the point about the need to, when we talk about digital literacy, to think about things that go beyond the digital definition of things, critical thinking, capacity to adapt. Those are, in my opinion, much more important elements about just the issue of coding, if you want. having the capacity and developing the capacity of our students to continue learning, the curiosity to continue learning for the rest of their life. That's what it will really prepare our students of today to become that productive citizens of the future. Last comment that I like to make, I promise to shut up, has to do with the context again. Because when we talk about digital literacy, we need to be mindful of the fact that context is extremely important. You know, there are significant variations of the concept of digital literacy and what that means and how it is translated into something precise on issues related to culture, language, history of a place. It is a very different perspective what we see, for instance, in the Middle East, though what it was in Latin America, in Africa, or in North America. And we need to be very mindful of that, because otherwise we get into the discussions about the colonial and neo-colonial approaches in the educational systems.
Francisco, that's very interesting, because I'd like to quote you about the context that matters, which we are going to discuss on the next questions about global versus local solutions. Because from your answer, Cecilia, Dr. Osama, and Harry, we can see that there are repeated patterns across the globe where education systems, often prioritize the digital literacy, or view and see digital literacy as teaching the students how to utilize the internet, for example, AI, for example. But what we often dismiss is that education systems is actually needs to prioritize growth over grades. And something that could also show that the future belongs to those who can think critically, lead with empathy and asking questions, critical questions, and that's important for their growth in the future. And this comes to the questions about the standards, because when it comes to education, this is something that is going around for a while, where education systems often prioritize grades over growth and that sort of thing. Because let's face it, a one-size-fits-all approach is not working. If we see out there, the situations is different for every countries. We have countries that needs to have more access. Let's say rural areas, there are underserved regions, and there are situations that is currently really difficult for some countries, and they also need to be taken into account. So how can international organizations avoid a one-size-fits-all approach when implementing tech-based educational reforms, and instead support solutions that are contextually relevant to local realities, because realities is different. The road is different in every country. So what are your take on that, Harry?
Yeah, thank you. I think global solutions or examples can inspire, but they need to be adapted to the local needs. Seldom do these top-down, one-size-fits-all approaches work. Instead, some kind of co-creation with local actors becomes essential. Again, there could be guiding principles, there could be global best practice, for lack of a better term, standard digital platforms, but it's only after customizing it to the local curriculum, language, as Cecilia said, and to the students themselves, then we might see this work. So it goes to local ownership for success. What can international actors do? First, to avoid the mistake of thinking that you can simply transport the project from one location to another. You can transport the ideas and the knowledge, and then adapt it in the implementation. And again, context is everything in education, as we've heard. So the idea is to create effective solutions, and making sure that they fit to the context, and this co-creation rather than transplanting will yield much better results. Going back to my Uzbekistan example, the television is the same in Uzbekistan, and the recording equipment is the same as everywhere else. It's that content and how it's used that makes sense for them at the time. They could have done online learning using the best platforms in the world, but they knew it wouldn't reach the remote rural areas that don't have full access, but they knew the televisions were everywhere. So that's the sort of local knowledge that needs to come in. So going back to international organizations, they may have the tools, the evidence, and technical support, but we need to leave it for communities to do the local adaptation. Education reform will only work and be sustainable and scale if it's built with communities. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Harry. Indeed, contextualizing things are important because when it comes to implementing reform, especially when it comes to a tech-based educational reform, we need to be mindful about the context in every country, in every culture, in every region. And I'm moving on to Cecilia, because Cecilia, you previously also talked a lot about how to pay attention to more cultural aspects and integrate it into the educational system. So what is your opinion on this matter?
Yeah, I would agree. I believe in the power of local communities on being more participative, on building their own appropriate content. Because again, for me, it's also about how can we take the advantage of using new technologies to scale and have more impact. But also, I think that there's the possibility of being super smart on really using the context to create new content and new and appropriate content, which for me it's very important in order to highlight the diversity of cultures, the diversity of opportunities that we have in every given context. I do want to build on something I think Francesca was saying, which is for me the key question is, how do we use curriculum or some of the design principles in the educational system in a way that we can also kind of emphasize on the importance of having a more flexible educational system that really enables and allows to develop the new kind of skills that I believe children and human beings in general need. And in order to do this, I do think that we need to be very aware that we might need to control how we use technology, so we actually can use technology to support creativity, to support caregiving, to support critical and smart thinking, to support co-designing, rather than replace and have technology do all of these things. So for me, the most important thing is really thinking and enabling the ecosystem to one, have the right technology and platforms that can really support this kind of skills. Two, also work with the workforce and teachers and all the systems that really can help enable this. And when I'm talking about the whole system, yes, I believe in the power of teachers, but more and more, I think that the way that human beings are learning goes beyond the educational system, and it's what they're learning in their daily proximity of the innumerable interactions that are happening. So how can we make sure that those interactions are also foreseeing and supporting the kind of skills and values that the children and human beings seem to need now more than ever? And maybe one other thing that I think it was Osama mentioning on the importance of data and evidence. I also think that we need to be a lot more fast on responding on bringing this data and evidence into informing and inspiring innovative policy and programs, because I think that there's a lot of research that has been done on the field of education, But control trials and that kind of like long research, it takes time to give you the results of the outcomes. So I really kind of believe more on the kind of like rapid research that can really inspire and inform policy faster, just because of the pace of what the changes with technologies. Everything is happening so fast that I really think that we need to be faster on also kind of like using this new way of rapid research to inform and inspire new policies and programs.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. And Dr. Osama, what do you think about this approach on global versus local solutions? How do we bridge the gaps? How do we, integrate and nurture both aspects so that we can see the advancement, but also at the same time, we still maintain the local wisdom within our educational system?
Sure, thank you. I think Harry summarized well, and in fact, the key is to localize the solutions. Definitely, international organization can bring a lot of value to local communities. However, they have to acknowledge that there are so many local and homegrown solutions that need to be acknowledged by international organizations as well, and the community of donors. I mean, the key and the simple question is to engage the communities in the solution. Localize what works in Ecuador will not work in Jordan, or might not work in Jordan. Although there are convergence globally in terms of frameworks, in terms of policies, whether we're talking about the UN system organizations or other organizations. I mean, now we're talking about competency framework for teachers, competency framework for students, technology integration, and these are more of a global solution, but everything has to be localized and contextualized, and there has to be an engagement for the local community. That's why many of the solutions in the past have failed, and that again has contributed to the failure of many of the education reform initiatives in many countries of the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Osama. And Francisco, what do you think about it? How we should do it, how we should contextualize things?
The big advantage of being the last one is that basically I can say I fully agree with what all my colleagues already have said, especially Harry, because Harry is my former boss, so I better sort of behave properly as we discuss these matters. But let me I agree that what it may work in one case might not be the best solution in other cases. In fact, it might be exactly the worst solution in other cases, and I'm sure that Harry and I can share many experiences of things that we have seen in many parts of the world in which the best solution in one place was the most terrible, proposal in another case. For that matter, of course, again, I go back to my comment about the context matters important. The copy-paste culture on these type of things don't work. Absolutely, it's also a terrible way to do it. And I agree that international, I will go back basically to your question and to question your question if you want, by saying, international organizations for sure, they have a role to play in as you were saying, in implementing, tech-based educational reforms. But there are significant risks associated with that. And some of them are precisely the one we were describing before. The fact that whatever solution in one place might not be the best one in the other ones, for which we need to make sure that we, basically enable organic solutions rather than impose solutions. What I was describing before, and Cecilia referred to about the fact that, there are sort of, frameworks of reference that are under which some of those solutions are being developed, which are very different in another context in which culture and language is different. And then, of course, there are other risks in terms of the potential mismatch. For instance, we tend to believe that some digital solutions for rural areas need to be designed in such a way that recognizing that connectivity to internet, for instance, is not working. It is very poor, very difficult to have in rural areas. Not always that is the case. There are significant sectors in urban areas which also have terrible problems in terms of connectivity, for instance. Or solutions that are being put in place, sort of which instead of resolving the problem of equity, are prolonging the problem of equity, that are being designed in such a way that are going to be benefiting the ones who already have previous exposure to some levels of sort of literacy in the digital world, that of course are going to be the ones who will benefit more than the ones who were behind, if you want. I will mention that, for instance, the approach that we have followed in our ecosystem here in Qatar Foundation is a kind of the test bed ideas approach, in using our ecosystem as a way to test those ideas, to see what it works, what it doesn't work, to properly contextualize that, in fact, to foster much more kind of indigenous growth of ideas. We have the big advantage in Qatar Foundation that in our education city, in our ecosystem of 24 educational institutions, we have from kindergarten up to doctoral education. So we cannot complain, as I was mentioning before, in our higher education subsystem, that what the previous levels of education are is terrible, because the previous levels of education are part of our system. So if we say that, is because our system is not working. So anyways, this is the kind of approach that we have followed here. Of course, listening to best practices globally, using whatever can be used from dev, but making sure that the growth of ideas, the inception of ideas is much more sort of indigenous rather than imposed.
If I can build on Francisco's point, I think what we're saying, or at least what I'm saying, is that you might not be able to transplant exactly a project, but there might be something that can work. To give another analogy, if we had a vaccine, the polio vaccine, it's going to work in every country. The difference will be how it's delivered, how it's managed in order to get the effective take-up in different locations, and that will vary. So before we dismiss, transplanting, we need to analyze whether it's the vaccine, whether it's the solution that's being transferred, or the mechanism or management system that needs to be adapted. I think that's the big difference. So it's a question of analyzing the situation and figuring out which part is the vaccine that's universal, and how do we vary the mechanisms for effective delivery and take up and get the results.
Well, thank you very much, Harry and Francisco, for your ideas. And, I think this has been a very interesting discussion. I would really love to continue because I have a lot of questions in my mind, but I think we have to wrap this discussion up. But one thing, if I can wrap this conversation, I'm going to use our previous analogy about the roads. If we think about education and technology as a road, of course, it's a long road. And just like any roads, whenever we drive on the roads, there are certain areas that we can speed up, but there are also certain area that we need to a little bit, a tad bit slower than the previous area. And that also reflects to the condition that's happening currently globally. There are some areas that are really speeding on their part of the road, but we also have the areas that are currently a little bit slower on their road. And how are we going to get through all those roads is to pay attention to the signs. And this is where digital literacy comes in. Because when you're on the road, you need to pay attention on the signs, whether you need to go left or right, or you need to slow down and you need to pay attention to someone's in your rear window and something like that. If we're not paying attention to those signs, we are going to be lost. We are going to be ended up in the place that we are not meant to be, or we are not, aiming for. So, and also, when we are traveling in the roads, we have our vehicle, and that vehicle would be the digital access, because without it, we can't go anywhere. We need to pay attention to our vehicle, but we also need to pay attention to the signs, and also we need to pay attention to which area are we going to, approach, which area are we going to arrive at. So, and also, it is our collective efforts to be able to go together hand in hand in order to make sure that the roads we are traveling is clear, and we all of us have the safe trip, and we are arrived at our destination safely. And so, that's a wrap for today's session, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you so much, from the bottom of my heart, to everyone, that you make your time to be here, share ideas, and we are more than grateful to be able to pick a few on your vision and your take on certain things, on these matters that we discussed today. So thank you so much, Harry Patrinos, Cecilia Thacker-Jones, Dr. Osama Obeidat, and Francisco Marmolejo, for taking a part on Are We Going Too Fast? No Person Left Behind on today's EdHeroes Global Forum 2025 sessions. I'm Farhanisa Nasution, wrapping this session up, and we'll see you in the next year's Global Forum. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.